you for coming. It's a great building, put a lot of time and energy into it. I thank Skip and Chief Gauthier out back for getting this room to its pristine condition as it was a number of years ago. So we appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Ryan, who's going to take us through the meeting and do some introductions as well. But Chris Ryan's with CMRPC.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here today. I know we're running a little bit late, so I'll try to get through the preliminaries as quickly as I can. This is the second stop of Secretary Bielicki's tour of a selection of priority development areas in the Blackstone Valley. In this particular case, again, I'm Chris Ryan. I'm the Community Development Manager for CMRPC. I'm also here with Principal Planner Trish Settles from our office. So briefly, our agenda is going to be with EOHED summarizing the goals of the Secretary's visit, providing a brief summary of the Planning Ahead for Growth strategy. I'll make a quick round of introductions after that, turn it over to Grafton town officials, I believe Steve, to talk about the project background. Then we can open it up for comments and questions and see if the Secretary has any final thoughts. So with that in mind, why don't we just step ahead with the introductions first, and then we'll go into EOHED after that. That probably sounds better. So I'm going to just lay out the people that I know are here today. If I miss somebody, please let me know. We want to make sure everybody is accounted for. Of course, the Secretary, Victoria McGuire, is here, the State Permit Ombudsman and Director of the Mass Permit Regulatory Office. Victor Negrete, Regional Planning Manager for the same office. Rosemary Scrivens, is she here today? No Rosemary. Larry Field, Special Initiatives Manager for DHCD. Bill Rayalt, the Smart Growth Program Manager, DHCD. I think we also have John Carlson from the Board of Selectmen here today. Dave Robbins from the Planning Board. Tim McInerney, the Town Administrator. Doug Willardson, Assistant Town Administrator. We have Doug. Ed Prisby from the Affordable Housing Trust. Mike Scully from the Economic Development Commission. Okay. Ann Morgan, the Assistant Town Planner. Steve Bishop, the former Emeritus Town Planner. That's right, absolutely. Jean Burnett, the developer. And we also have Paul Gauthier, Mill Villages Advisory Committee. Is he here? Gauthier, okay. And John LaPointe, Economic Development Commission. Okay, great. So at this point, just let me turn it over to EOHED for just a quick summarization of the goals of the Secretary's visit, and then we can turn it over to Grafton officials to talk about the project.
Thanks, everybody, for coming together, and glad to be here, and I'm sorry we're running late on our schedule. We're trying to hit a lot of places in one day here. So just very quickly, we have, Governor Patrick and I both feel very strongly that if Massachusetts is going to have a successful future, we need to continue to grow. And we are in many ways a successful state today, but if we're going to continue to be prosperous, and also if we're going to create economic opportunity for everybody in every region of the state, we need to continue to grow. The governor and I think that's a pretty straightforward proposition. However, as it turns out, I'm sure in this community and many other communities, there's a little bit of a dilemma. Massachusetts is already today the third most densely populated state in the country. We're a state where at our local community level, we have an extraordinarily high quality of life in almost every national survey. When you ask people about the quality of life in their communities, Massachusetts communities rank very, very highly. So it's not surprising that when we talk about the need to grow, people say, well, okay, I'm on board with the idea of growing, but I want to think about, is it going to grow in a way that's detrimental to the character of our community and quality of life? Not so sure about that. So we've been trying to really work on threading that needle and saying, how can we at the state work with regional planning agencies and partners in local communities, and how can we thread that needle and say, is there a way that we can talk about growth? Is there a kind of growth? Where is it in your community? What is it going to be used for? What scale is it at? That we can find that middle ground, that we can, you all in the community and we all in the state can find common ground and a place where we can say, This is something that makes sense to us for the state. It's going to help us grow and continue to have a prosperous economy. And by the way, that includes housing from our perspective for this state. If we're going to continue to grow and we're going to continue to grow our businesses, we need to continue to produce housing. Massachusetts has a very innovation-based economy. The businesses in that innovation economy are here today because of the talent that's here. If the young people and young families don't want to stay here or feel priced out or feel they have better opportunities elsewhere, and this is not the great place to get talent that it is today, then the businesses that are here are going to move along and chase the talent where it goes. That's the way our economy is working. So housing is part of that. So where can we find those opportunities to grow that we at the state say, that's great, that's helping us have a prosperous and a sustainably prosperous state, but that you all can also say, oh, if that's what you mean by growth, if you mean let's rehab the old mill building, or let's look at a town center that used to be active and vital and isn't so active and vital anymore. Those kinds of opportunities that make sense to you as well, and that get people in the community saying, okay, that kind of growth, I'm not worried that it's cutting into our quality of life, and in fact, it could help make up for a stronger and better and more interesting community. So we've undertaken this, so we call that a strategy, planning ahead for growth, that we want to work with you, and that if we identify the places where you think growth makes sense to you and makes sense to us, and also with some input from the marketplace, so we're sure it's places that we have some reasonable expectation that private developers and investors will want to go and invest their money. And then asking you to think about creating what we call prompt and predictable permitting environment. So if it's something that we've agreed where development should occur, and we've agreed on the scale and the type, then encouraging you to write your local zoning that conveys that message to people. If you build this here and at this scale and at this kind of use, you're going to have an easy time permitting in our community because that's what we said we wanted there. And so if you're going to do what we want, you're going to have a good time. Massachusetts has been a state that has a reputation for not always being easy to permit. And frankly, that overall doesn't bother me as much as you might think as the economic development director for the state. What really bothers me is that in some cases, even people who want to build things in the places and at the scale and of the type we want, they still have a difficult time doing it. So really focusing on that is, let's start with not saying anybody in Massachusetts should be able to build whatever they want, wherever they want. That's not who we are, and we don't need to get there to have a successful future. But we certainly ought to be able to say, in these places, we should send a clear message from your communities that if people are willing to invest and develop things that we say we want, built a community consensus around, it should be easy to do. That's the big thing we ask for communities in the partnership. And on our part, the big thing that we're trying to make a contribution on our part is infrastructure, because we realize that we are the third most densely populated state. We have underinvested in our infrastructure in Massachusetts for many, many years, as most other states in the United States have. It's a chronic problem in the country. And so for new development to occur, and to make sure that new development is not going to be at the detriment of the community, it often needs an infrastructure upgrade. In some cases, the new development might cause traffic problems that would hurt the community, or would tax the capacity of our water and wastewater systems. So we often need infrastructure in order to allow new development and growth in a way that maintains the quality of the community. And if we're going to, sometimes the developers can help pay for that. But if we say to a developer, if there's upgrades that are needed, you're going to have to pay for all of that, it really limits the interest of the private investment community. So public infrastructure, we should have some responsibility to pay, as between you locally and us in the state, we realize our finances are not in great shape at the state. They're in solid shape, but we're not certainly not awash in cash. But as between us and the state and you and local communities, realistically, it's on us, we feel, to provide those infrastructure investments. Your capital budgets are devoted to your school buildings and your town hall, your fire and police stations, and so forth. There's some cases where local communities can help with infrastructure, but by and large, we think Governor Patrick and I think we have to play a major role in helping provide that infrastructure financing if we're going to have that occur. So that partnership, identify places, create good zoning and permitting that sends a clear message. We invest in infrastructure in some cases with you. And then finally, marketing, that we are conveying a new message about Massachusetts, that this is the way we do things. And if we have identified growth and development we want to see, and we're eager to work with people who want to make those kind of investments in our community. So that's our strategy. In particular, as a way of identifying these places, we have started a planning strategy. We started with different regions of the state, where we've asked both local community representatives and then regional planning folks, and then our state team to look at regions. We've taken generally about 30 communities or so at a time, a region about 30 communities at a time, and said, can we reach some agreement here about where we want growth to occur? And I think, again, part of the history of the legacy of Massachusetts is there's always a tension between the state and local communities, and people said, well, Greg, you can have the local folks come up with a map of where they would like to see things, but if you do that and separately ask the regional planning agency and the state to come up with a map, they're going to be 3 different maps, and you're going to come out with just going to show how far apart everybody is. And we said, well, let's try it. And it turns out that hasn't been the case at all. And in fact, there has been tremendous consensus. And we don't try to force it. There are cases where communities think something would be a great idea, and frankly, we don't think it's as strong an opportunity. And so we agree to disagree. But rather than worrying about where we disagree, we say, let's figure out how many places where we're on the same page. And in fact, it's an awful lot. And so we made a lot of progress and identifying places where you all agree in your community it would be a good place to move forward, and the regional planning agency says it makes sense to them, and we say it makes sense to us. And we're now establishing a nice track. We started these planning processes, I think the first one maybe close to 5 years ago now, Victoria, down in the South Coast. And we've done several of them now. And for our part, to show how serious we are about those plans, and they're not just a plan that sits on a shelf, we are making our infrastructure, again, our big part is infrastructure investments, and we're deliberately making infrastructure, going out of our way, putting our thumb on the scale in favor of making infrastructure investments in these what we call priority development areas that you and we have identified in different parts of the state as being great places for us to grow, and places that are good for your community and good for the region and good for the state. So right now, and am I stealing your speech about the part you're going to do? But we focused recently on an area that was really centered on the 495 corridor. And one of the anomalies of our state is that the communities that are along the 495 corridor seem like a natural place to look at them together in the Metro West area. Unfortunately, given we have actually 3 regional planning agencies who each have a piece of that swath. And so the three of the regional planning agencies did work on that, and that came out very well. But then we wanted to work with Central Mass, and there was an interest in saying, they thought that was a useful idea, so could we not look at that also for the remaining communities within their region? And that's a process that we've are well into, and so our visit today in various communities in and around Blackstone Valley has been, for our part of the process, to understanding better what you all locally have proposed as promising and regionally, and to give us a sense of where we agree and where those, and with a commitment to you that when those areas where we do agree, we are actively going to be asking ourselves the question, what can we do to help make things happen in those places?
Before we turn it over to Steve to talk a little bit about the project, I also want to recognize Senator Michael Mueller has joined us today. Thank you for being with us today. And just a little bit about the prioritization projects that Central Mass has been involved with. The Secretary mentioned the 495 Compact. This particular project is in the Blackstone prioritization area. We had Central 13, and we just got finished and posted to our website the Rural 11 report, which I think went up Monday or of last week, if I'm not mistaken. So very, very glad to have that. We're looking forward to seeing what our role will be for next steps. We're very excited about the Rural 11 report because it has some very specific next steps that are listed in a table with priorities that are attached to them. So please take a look at that and see what your thoughts are about a model. So at this time, let me also turn it over to the former town planner, Steve, and also the developer to kind of give us a background on the project and kind of where it stands today. And then how much time do you think we'll have for questions after that?
We'll have a couple of minutes at least.
Okay. We do want to have some opportunity to do that, but without further ado, Steve.
Thank you all for being here. Yes, it's kind of the strange position as kind of emeritus town planner right now. We're going through a transition, and I do want to be brief in my remarks so that Gene Burnett, the owner of the site, has more time to really kind of more fully describe it. But to give an overview, this is a 40R site. Actually, I worked very closely with Gene and with members of the town back in 2006 when I came on board through 2007 to work it through, and actually it was, I believe, pretty close to a unanimous vote by town meeting to endorse the 40R designation. There had been a very significant planning process in 2005, 2006, I believe, looking at South Grafton, which over the last decade has really been one of the growth areas in the town, which is something that we like to see because most of the more urbanized areas, the old mill villages, are principally in this area, and it's been part of the strategy of the town to try to concentrate new growth in areas where historically growth took place. So we went through the 40R process in 2000, I think it was about 2007 when it was finally passed by town meeting, and the site, as you most are aware, is a 21E site, so it had additional challenges in terms of bringing it to a point where we could actually start honestly looking to develop it. Working with Gene and other folks in town, we were able to receive a demonstration grant from US EPA to bring some innovative technologies on site to look at additional cleanup there, principally of waste oil, or actually a bunker oil that was on site that had been a real problem, and Gene can speak more to that because I think that is a huge attribute to the site now and actually makes it that much more interesting from a total development and particularly a sustainable development perspective, and I think that that's an important part of the story down there. We were also able to working with the former Lieutenant Governor, the site was designated as a site under his Brownfield Support Initiative, and we were able to allocate $1 million to actually partially the physical cleanup of the canal, some of the oil contamination down there. So there's been and Gene can probably speak certainly in terms of previous investment, but there's been a huge investment from the private and public sectors on this site. We're grateful that we're at a point now, and I believe that we will have gone through the phase 3 cleanup. We're hopefully very close to an RAO on the site, which means that we're really kind of open for business at this point. Part of the designation of the 40R is that you recognize is that we had to affirm that we had the necessary infrastructure to be able to actually develop the site. That is one might imagine. Grafton was one of the fastest growing communities in central Massachusetts over the last 15 years, and it has put a huge strain on public infrastructure. So it's certainly an area that we would want to revisit with the state in terms of our current capacity and our ability to build it out. Under the scenario that we're talking about, we did introduce a mixed use scheme for the site with up to 240 units on site. So the town had made a significant investment and commitment to high-density development, of which, as you're aware, is that a significant part of it would be affordable. So I think that the town has been on board through the planning process and the vision for this area. One of the things that we were also able to accomplish was the development on part of the site, a public park, which really kind of served two purposes. One was really to show the folks in South Grafton who had historically not seen a lot of attention from the town, that it was going to become a priority, and that it was a priority of the town to look at ways to reinvigorate and redevelop and reinvest in the historic urban areas of the community. So we actually, through funds, and part of it incentive funds from the 40R program, the remainder from CPC funds, we're able to construct a very nice park on about 2 acres of land just on the south side of the site. And that has been a facility now that has seen increased growth. It's been a site that has full service. We have all infrastructure tied into it. It's been the scene of a number of large concerts over the last 2 or 3 years. So it has become a focus point of community pride, but also of gathering. And pushing forward on this site would obviously really deliver on a promise that I think that the town made to this area, but also I think is very much in concert with your objectives, Mr. Secretary. So we hope that we will look at this very carefully. One of the other aspects that I think that the town and the owner could look at is in terms of trying to coordinate and fast-track the regulatory process of the 21E so that we can get over those final hurdles and get into a position where we're ready to go down there. So I think that that's an important part of the teamwork that I think that we could see between the town, the developer, and the state to really help this process beyond just hopefully identifying it as one of the key development sites in this area. So that's my brief overview. I think it's very important to hear from Gene Burnett, the owner, to tell some of the very specifics about, and I think some of the excitement that can be understood about what's available there, and how really kind of looking at that there's mutual benefit on all levels to seeing it built out, consistent with the vision that the town and the developer have, or the owner of this site has now. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Gene Burnett to come up.
See, let me just mention, as Gene comes up, that I was trying to give the overview of the process that we have been taking. I think, as you said, there's no question. I think we've already built that consensus. The town's taken a lot of actions to focus its energy and support here. We have the 40R designation. So your segue, I think, was absolutely right. For this site, it's less a question of, is this one of those places that makes sense? I think we're there, and the relevant question, as you said, is we'd love to help, and what are the next steps that we all need to collectively take to help make things happen?
Yeah, I think echoing what you're saying, it's pretty clear that this site is actually a poster child for every one of the points that you hit in your presentation on what you'd like to see. Keeping in mind the context of the site is the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, and that the mills that are along the Blackstone were the engines of growth and the source of wealth for everybody in this region. The concept and the challenge is taking an abandoned, degraded landscape and trying to reconvert it into, again, the engine for growth, innovation, and other things that the Blackstone Valley was worldwide recognized for, particularly on the innovation end of things. So our focus has been on dealing with the realities on the ground, which is really what you were talking about. And the realities on the ground on this site is that the population of this particular town isn't enough to sustain some of the smart growth goals, which are to combine commercial space with residential space. So the hurdle that we have to address is how do we revitalize the commercial landscape in bedroom communities? Because we need a diversified revenue source for the towns to support the infrastructure that they create. So for us, that requires, again, this kind of revisioning of what conceptually occurs in this kind of bedroom community as far as commercial activities that can become magnet activities. So our focus, as we've gone through this process, and again, as you recognize, this has been built on consensus. Everything we've done here from the outset of this project has been built through public charrettes, engaging the public and making them engaged in moving the project forward. So in that essence, we've also engaged a number of universities in the region and other thinkers, kind of innovative thinkers around the country, in what would constitute viable commercial activities that would basically become catalysts for the project to proceed. And we've identified those things, kind of core curricula issues around education and how we look and create sustainability in situations where the pathway has always been to abandon, to move on to a greener pasture, places that don't have the legacy issues that this does. So what we've done is, with universities and others, is create kind of magnet concepts. Part of them being the educational element that this particular site exemplifies and is endemic to most industrialized rivers in the country, as well as here in Massachusetts. So we want to develop activities that are replicable. So we want this site to be a poster child of success of what can happen in other places. So we've incorporated a number of technological concepts that are developed here in this state, that are concepts that have resonance throughout the world, not just in the United States itself, along the lines of using degraded waters as a public amenity, not as a public nuisance. So that takes a complete change in perspective, and that's occurring, and we're successful at doing that. The other things that we're looking at are things like microbreweries, other things like that, that again, from a permitting perspective, attracting that kind of magnet activity here at the site would allow people to come here, would encourage people to come here, just as they're coming here now to the Eco Machine and the green technologies that we're doing from all over the world. We have people from Belarus, we have people from the Ukraine, we have people from Korea, all coming to look at this little greenhouse we have in a public park, and that's generating a complete change in the way the site is viewed. Again, it changes the perspective from degraded landscape to a public amenity. If we incorporate on-site food production, sustainable energy production, the use of the existing waterfall and the impoundment that we have here, and the consequent dam that goes with it, which is one of the issues that we could use help in addressing, then we can continue to fill out the portfolio of technologies that, again, move us forward in our thinking about how we create a sustainable community, how we create a sustainable landscape and sustainable businesses. And that's fully underway. For your help, what we would specifically request is looking at the public water supply, because this degraded site has a legacy issue that, even though we've addressed it with EPA funds and through our own funds and through the MCP process with the DEP, there will always, because of the nature of the groundwater profile here, be a risk that the residual contamination that exists in the bedrock, which we can't access through any current technology, could in theory pose a risk to the drinking water supply of the town of Grafton. There's a simple solution for that that doesn't necessarily involve source reduction, which we've gone through every possible opportunity to reduce that source reduction. One way to deal with this that would satisfy the investment community, who will be looking at it when they look at this site, is to help put a filtration system in the South Grafton water district wells. Activated carbon deals with this issue specifically. So infrastructure investment in the South Grafton, producing a sustainable, high-quality water supply for the community is critical. The other element of it is that we've used a significant amount of funding from mass development on a site that was far more complex than anybody thought it would be to do site investigation. That has created a financial impediment to us moving forward that we believe you can help us potentially relieve. You know, other sites around the Commonwealth, this has been forgiven. And when Steve said that a lot of money has been invested here, I think more money has been invested here than almost any other site in the state. So, you know, our calculation is somewhere between $10 and $12 million in public and private funds have been invested in the remediation of this project. So that's another place that you could be very helpful. The third place is probably the most critical element in forwarding the development concept, because I think we have residential customers of residential development customers that are interested in the site because, unfortunately, we can't go out there today, but the public amenities are enormous. The riverfront, we have more riverfront than any other property I know of that's available in the state right now. We have a step dam that's 200 feet wide, that's bounded by a natural area on one side and the mill site on another, that runs all year throughout the year. It's a magnificent, you know, it's like Quechee Gorge, and it's here in central Massachusetts. Nothing like it anywhere. So the residential component isn't the challenge. The challenge is the commercial component. So if we can find, through your aid and through others' aid, these commercial, let's call them commercial anchors, magnet anchors, that bring people into the landscape and start using the landscape in a way that the smart growth zoning was designed to encourage, but we see significant impediments in implementing it. I understand this is a common problem with 40R districts around the Commonwealth, that the commercial element becomes the impediment to the project moving forward. So your help in identifying potential candidates, moving state institutions or health facilities to do, for example, this is an aging demographic where we could use something like an assisted living facility, but also more directly a physical therapy type center where a community gym could also be built. This is being done in places in, you know, in Charlottesville, Virginia, other places that are looking at multiple services that become magnet activities, but also address a pressing need within the community. So that's one place. The other thing is we've started this educational consortium. We started what's called the Living System Laboratory. Right now we have Tufts University, Brown University, Clark University, WPI, the Conway School of Design, there's one or two other universities, all focusing their activities on this site. We have a $10 million NSF grant that's now being proposed by some of the universities that are involved with the project that are looking specifically at the issues that you described. Sustainability issues, how do we create a sustainable development in this kind of landscape? So your efforts in moving some of the core concepts, the core activity concepts from a magnet perspective forward are critical to helping us out here. But we think the vision is compelling, and there's certainly public support for it. I don't think you'd see this many people in the room if there weren't. And they've been here every step of the way since the moment we started and have supported us every step of the way, and they come up with creative ideas. We have stewards of the site, the two people behind you, Skip and Phil, who are there every day policing the park and constantly looking out for our best interests and the interests of the community. This site doesn't need any more local support. What it really needs is the state, you know, to help us get the final, you know, the final step. And we're almost there. We're at the tipping point. It doesn't take much. One or two anchors. It's 60,000 square feet of commercial space. One or two anchors, a brewery, a distillery, public health services, although they don't go together necessarily that well. All of those things could throw us over, push us over the edge, and certainly addressing the public water supply issue would completely that would eliminate any of the 21E issues remaining on the site. We absolutely resolve those as an impediment to investment.
So is the filtration system, is that something you've scoped out what that would involve and what the price would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the South Grafton, you actually have some people from the South Grafton Water District behind you, the same stewards. They did it on one of their other wells on the other side of the river. I don't know what it cost, but it's, you know, in the couple $1 million range, something like that, you know. But again, that would improve the water quality throughout the district. It's not just for the benefit of our site. It resolves a bad taste issue, a water quality issue that's a nuisance condition for the people in South Grafton, and again falls into this kind of, disadvantaged community perspective that South Grafton has faced for as long as I've known it. I grew up here. My parents owned a mill on the Blackstone River. I'm pretty familiar with the issues, and South Grafton has always perceived itself and still finds itself in the position of being somewhat underserved in their perspective. So anything we can do to change that is fantastic. It also has the potential to be the best part of the community. You know, Steve was instrumental in, you know, incorporating other commercial zoning by right here that matches the smart growth district, but expands it to the rest of the South Grafton community. Again, giving us the capacity to make this the engine of growth. So everybody in Grafton, instead of going to Westboro to, you know, for a shopping experience or a community experience, can come here. You know, the expense of dollars on daylighting the river. You know, the plan from the outset has been here to, you know, take this public amenity and really highlight it. You know, the public walkways is something that the Park Service has wanted to do. It's something Mass Audubon wants to do. Mass Fish and Wildlife have all been involved in this site and see this as an enormous natural resource. And if we can daylight that as well, finding out through the Department of Transportation if we can find funds to advance the bike path, which goes through the site. There's so much work here that can be done by the state. It's tremendous. You know, there's all kinds of opportunity.
What's the, remind me, what's the total build-out plan look like?
It's 240 residential units, 40 on the south side of the street, and 200 on the north side of 122. 20,000 square feet was reserved for commercial on the north side, overlooking, theoretically, when I was envisioning that, was overlooking the waterfall. It would be a premier, you know, multi-million-dollar premier restaurant site for the right kind of facility. South side with a 40,000 square feet of commercial space and 40 units. That was conceived of more of this kind of potentially assisted living, office work environments, and office living environments together. And there seems to be, you know, it's an idea that has a lot of support, but not a lot of people are out there investing in that.
So it's only about 60,000 square feet of commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what does the marketplace look like for the residential these days?
The residential, we've actually had two buyers potential buyers in the last 6 months after a huge dead period come by. One is developing a proposal. The other one is working with community builders who's doing some work in this area and is interested in the site as well to look at the community builders being interested in the affordable component, and they want to partner with a market rate developer. So that's a relatively large Boston developer. The other one is a relatively large Western Mass developer that does multifamily type projects. But again, you know, their impediments are commercial and, you know, the issues around the legacy issues of the contamination.
And this would be, we're talking about 25% affordable?
It depends, market rate on, it's 20% affordable on market rate, 25% affordable minimum on rental rates. Is the zone.
So 20% for ownership and 25% for rental.
Minimum. I think that's minimum.
And the connection you made between the locating commercial and, it's not like you're suggesting that having some of the commercial was either useful or necessary for the residential?
Actually, the opposite. The residential will take, you know, if it didn't have the commercial, the residential proposal is pretty straightforward. Smart growth zoning dictates a mixed use, commercial. So we got the density that was necessary to fund the remediation through the 40R, but we got the commercial that impedes the redevelopment through the 40R.
The residential market appears to be better than the commercial market. The residential developers are saying that we have to do both. I'm not sure we want to do either.
Okay. But I was just say, what is, could you do the residential first?
It's not allowed under the current zoning bylaw. We could do residential on the north side because it's 20% was an option on the north part where the majority of the residential components are. That 20% commercial was, you know, the 20,000 square feet of commercial is not an obligation. It's up to. But
On the south side it is.
You know,
So we're trying to identify whether, ideally for us, where there are places where we feel like we have a pretty good handle on, we think that we're pretty sure that the private, it's not going to bear a reasonable return for the private sector to pay for all the costs that are involved. But the private sector could bear, ideally, a lot of the cost involved. When I say the cost, I mean the total development cost. So we're trying to figure out, is there a gap there? And what would the gap be? So I'm trying to get a sense of...
What's that gap? And how, what
or
is
is there a gap? I mean, if the 200...
There is a gap.
200 residential units without commercial, and I'm not trying to violate the rules here, but just for the sake of an experiment of thinking about it, do you think you could get someone to build 200 units residential without the commercial requirement today, just from a market perspective?
No, we could, but not without some support. And the support would be around the issues regarding the dam and the water supply. Because there are two, outside the water supply, the issue of, the water supply issue is one of the filtration, the other is the cost of connection. So in South Grafton, the connection cost was $5,000 per unit for residential development, and if you looked at 200 units for a site that maybe has a unit value of, let's say, $10,000 to $15,000 per unit, that makes it a real big challenge to do the residential component because your minimum buy-in to do your connections is $1 million. That's a big impediment. The other side of that impediment...
And that's a water district.
That's a water district issue.
Yeah.
So that's where, where we could use issues. Issues around the water district are definitely places where we could use help. The dam is the other issue, is that the dam is both a liability and an enormous amenity because the residential units on the north side of the site have a river view, waterfall view, pond view, or canal view. If you take away the dam, half of those amenities go away. If you leave the dam, you need to do some improvement to it, although not a lot, that both improves the amenity, reduces the liability, and brings a magnet activity, because this used to be a premier bird banding area. It's a premier waterfowl migratory flyway. Right
So would
here.
you prefer to leave the dam?
I don't think there's much of a choice, because like many of the dams along the river, the impoundment is a place where all of the contaminants that were ever created in Worcester...
Gravity wouldn't like it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
The Army Corps actually did a very substantial master planning process for that, and essentially decided that the best thing to do is actually if we can
Raise the water.
level of water and just essentially use that to encapsulate all of that legacy contamination on the site.
So it improves the water, but it improves by doing that, you improve the water power capacity for small hydro, which we have people that are interested in doing, and you improve the wildlife amenity.
So I guess I'm prepared to accept that you're saying it can't be done solely with private funds, that there is a gap there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question that I'm pushing back on is, do we know that it can be done with some help?
We believe so.
So so convince me.
Well, the two companies that have come forward, and other companies that have looked at the site, have said we would be interested if. That's where we are. We have the two companies we have right now. We are interested. We need some help, not if. It's more like they have a defined concept of where they need aid, where they need us to step in. So, in a straightforward development proposition, somebody like us comes up with a subdivision plan, you do the subdivision plan, you find somebody to buy the property. What we're being approached with is more like, well, we're really interested, we think we have the money, but we need you to be partners, Kip and I, our company, because they want our skin in the game. They need us to help resolve these issues, particularly around which we have public support. You know, for better or worse, I'm the face of the project. And I think it's that we've engendered a certain amount of trust within the community that we're going to deliver what we propose, the vision that we help create. So there's a requirement, in a sense, for us to stay involved. And then further to address these specific issues around the environment, the environmental issues, which I'm more knowledgeable about than anybody else, and the dam issues, all of these regulatory overlap that we're under. It's taken 10 years to get up to our speed.
So I guess, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I think just in terms of next steps, I think what would be useful is if, and again, I'm not trying to focus on a portion of the project that upsets the balance of what you all in town are trying to achieve, but I'm just, in Massachusetts today, residential is the best market. That's the reality.
That's the reality.
So if we're going to test the idea of is somebody prepared to do something, but there's a gap, we're going to test the idea that if we made a further public investment, someone else would step up, then it seems to be the easiest thing to focus on is 200 units of residential as a test. And so it would be great if you could give us as a next step, some sense of what does the pro forma look like, what are the total development costs, and what you think is, could be privately.
I believe that could be done. I think that we can come up with a ballpark issue. Our engineers can probably come up with a ballpark of what the filtration system would look like, within, the 30% range of cost.
Yeah.
What that would look like. I think we can also address, what the stabilization of the dam would require, again, within, let's say, the 30% order of magnitude. Not back in the envelope, but not a detailed engineering study.
Right. And the reason to just get the order banks, so in other words, I'm trying to understand, is this something that the total development cost of the project, including, I'm just making up numbers, but if the total development cost of the project, including the construction, site work, and the water and everything else, and the cost of construction is $20 million, then is the amount between these various pieces. And for this purpose, I know there's an instinct to say, well, can we chip away at the problem? Could you give us, is there a way to get $1 million for the water filtration? And is there a way to get $1 million for the dam? And it may be that realistically the way we have to make progress is to chip away at it, but it's very useful for us to see it all at once. And then for us to understand, so how much of that total development cost, including all that stuff that needs to be in to make it successful. And so it would be a list of everything that you would agree, you'd say if we do all that, it's a readily marketable site. And then the question is, so right now, at this minute, I don't even know if the public side stuff is 10% of that total or 50% of that total.
Well, just orders of magnitude, just rough numbers. Okay? If it's 200 units, 1,000 square feet, 1,000 to 1,200 square feet per unit, construction costs $150 to $175 a square foot. The north side of the parcel is approaching $50 million in investment in the capital structure. The two public amenity issues are relatively small in comparison to that. The dam can be stabilized for under $1 million. I know that our dam engineers looked at it.
Okay.
The outstanding issue, we could probably take the numbers from the filtration system over on the other South Grafton Water District wells and just plug in that number. I think there's more output, isn't there? Phil, there's more output from those wells than there is on the wells over here, or not?
I think there is, I'm pretty sure there is, yes.
So we could use those numbers, and that's recently, that filtration system went online last spring?
Okay, so I don't, okay, well, we're not gonna get to it today, but I think then, so for example, then I would say, but you also told me there's an issue with the connection. So are you putting that in? So,
No.
and then so just for everybody's benefit, and we gotta go in 2 minutes here, but, so we look at these things in two different ways. One way is whether we can make an investment that we think is going to essentially immediately result in an outcome. So in other words, if you said, Greg, I'm talking about $50 million of private investment and maybe $3 million of public investment, then I'm going to say, is that the deal that you want to make? In other words, if you bring the 50, I'll bring the 3. Which correspondingly means until you bring the 50, don't call me until you bring the 50. Right? That's one way to do it, right? And another way, and that's what our preference is, and that's what we focused on is where we put $25 million into a new Orange Line station at Assembly Square in Somerville, and now there's 1,000 apartments, and Parker's Healthcare is moving 4,000 people around that new train station. So we put in $25 million. They've probably put in $250 million so far, and they'll be over $1 billion in 2 years. So I got
Good man.
that was a good catalyst, right?
Yeah, right.
So that's one kind of deal that we try to do, and that's, so I'm just being very open with you. So that's, if that's what this feels like as a situation. And in order to do that, we understand, my career before working for the governor was in the private sector, a lot of real estate development. I understand there's a chicken and the egg nature of that. So if we work that out, we could also do something where, again, potentially, the state's not investing the $3 million, but I'm saying, we have a check for $3 million here, and you can tell the people who you're talking to, who are saying, what about, that they can call Victoria McGuire, and she can say, yeah, that's the deal we struck, and if you guys are ready to go, we're ready to go too. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, which is also realistic, I mean, is we understand it's not our favorite thing, but it's realistic, is in some cases, we're talking about something that we think is a good idea, like we agree this site is a good idea. And frankly, we're not on the verge of something in the way that you described, but it just makes sense for us to make progress. So for example, the money that we in the state have put into environmental remediation of the site already, right? Nobody said to you, oh, you're going to build apartments tomorrow if we do this? They just said, we understand it's a process, it's going to take time, we're going to put in some money now, we're optimistic it's going to work out well over time, but we understand we can't say, we're only going to do this if you build apartments next year, because it's not going to work that way. So that's, as we talk from here, I think that's one thing we want to check with each of you, and we'll follow up offline about. But are you feeling like this is a situation? And again, there's no good or bad answer to each one. I'll tell you that for obvious reasons, if you're able to make the deal I described in the first category, we're going to be more interested, and you're probably going to find that we'll give you more money faster. Doesn't mean we won't do it the other way. But if we are continuing in the vein of chipping away at the issues confronting the site, then we'll try to figure out some way we can be helpful in that regard. But that's sort of, just give you our mindset, that's a different path than if you feel like the market is in a condition that we may be on the verge of a deal, and if we do something, you could land somebody, and that's a different conversation.
Well, the market is getting there, and all of the above strategy works.
I think this is something that if I had come out and seen this 3 years ago, obviously we would have said, we would have said, look, don't try to convince me you're on the verge of trying to make a big deal, because you and I both know you aren't.
But it helps in our discussions with the developers to insert this option into the discussion and say, let's figure out how we make it work, and what do we need, let's go see the secretary and see if this is a project that can.
There's no question that would be a huge
Driving question.
everything you talked about would be a huge positive impact on marketability.
Okay.
No question.
All right, so let's try to work with you on seeing if we can, what that deal looks like. And by the way, I'm just saying, I'm not saying that we're prepared to make that commitment, but I'm saying.
That's what, we got that on tape.